Hi, and welcome to this
Hi, I'm Flo.
episode of Zeitgeist podcast with Niklas and Flo. Hi, Niklas.
HOA.
Today we're going to talk about HO boards and HO's HOA,
That's correct.
which stands for Homeowners Association, right? And, and you have been on one for a while. I mean, from what I heard, people are rather running away from HOA boards, actually. Maybe you could give a bit of a background what they are and what
Yeah.
drove you to
So,
actually
just to give you a little overview, when
volunteer
you
for
buy
that.
an apartment or even if you buy a house in some communities in the US, you are automatically part of the HOA. And with that, it is, um, I don't know if we have like a similar concept in Europe, but basically the HOA is, the membership of a house. And the members are voting each for every year for a certain amount of people to get into the board of directors. These people that might be, it depends on the size of the community. It can be 3 people, it can be 5, 7, 9. It's the most what I saw. The board is basically deciding on the behalf of the membership what's happening in the building. So let's say a pipe bursts or something like this, then the board needs to decide in a meeting with which contractor they want to go to do the repairs and to basically approve the funding for these repairs. Or if you want to do some changes in the lobby, or if you want to renew the elevators, the hallways, if you want to have a new pool or whatever, the board is basically giving the direction. And then it depends on the amount of money which needs to be spent on a certain item. The members could vote on it, against it, or in favor of it. And as you could assume, because we're talking about a lot of money. HOAs are not cheap. There are definitely different types of interests in what's happening with the money. Just to give you an example, we have 320 units in the building where I live, and everyone is paying an average of 1.5K, 2K per month. So there's a lot of money which is collected on a yearly base. And on the same time, we have 40 employees for valet, cleaning, maintenance, stuff like this, receiving. And so there's a lot going on. So a building or a community in the US is pretty similar than basically leading a company.
That's very
Exactly.
interesting.
So
And people are
from
elected for a certain
my
time period, I
experience in our
reckon, right?
building, it's always for a year, but I believe there are also communities where you can get elected for 2 years.
Yeah. So maybe to set it, I know like in Germany, you have something like a Gesellschafterversammlung, which is also kind of the owners usually contract some company to administer the building. If there's several apartments in a building that are owned by different people, for example, then you have some administrator that deals with the basic things around it. Nebenkostenabrechnung, which is like utility bills, all this kind of stuff is basically done there. And they're also on important decisions like use of reserves and so on, their decisions. But I don't really remember that there's something like a board or so, but it's more like the people who own it basically have a vote on specific
Yeah, I can tell you
sense. In that
from
sense, I
what I
think it's
saw and
different.
from what I really experienced on a day-to-day life, it is really political. Some people are starting lying or overselling their own abilities just to get into the board or to make sure that someone is not getting into the board. Um, as I said, I guess there are like a lot of different perspectives on board decisions, and you have a lot of eyes looking up to you to make sure that you are doing the right decisions. It's definitely not thankful job. you don't get paid, but you have a lot of work, you have a lot of contracts you have to study before you make a decision. Because at the end, you want to make sure that the best things will happen to your investment or to your property and then automatically to your neighbors. Yeah, it's definitely a job, a full-time job.
And did you see like people coming in like more the dictator side of things, like on
Yeah,
a
I
power
mean,
trip or
you
something like
see
that,
that
just being there
sometimes
really for the
people really
politics? Like,
change
have you seen
their,
something like that as well?
you know, how they approach certain things. And in one moment, he or she is really like a nice person. The moment you get a taste of power, you totally change.
Yeah. Yeah, that's very interesting. And have you ever like, how was it when there were like
Oh, yeah.
these assemblies of people?
I
Did
guess it would
people
be
ever
easier
shout
to
at each
ask how
other?
many
Does it get
meetings
really
were really
dramatic, or is
smoothly.
it
So we had
rather
at
calm
least
and
one
relaxed?
meeting per month, sometimes also something it's called a town hall, which is basically like a assembly of all the members who can just ask stuff. And, randomly we try to make sure that everyone is on the same page. Rather than a board meeting where you have like a strict agenda and you need to keep up with the agenda, and you have a time limit where you can speak, stuff like this. And there are always shouting matches and stuff like this. So I guess if at this point, Netflix should definitely figure out if it doesn't make sense to make a TV show about HOA board meetings or HOA boards in general.
Yeah, sounds really interesting. And then my feeling would be probably 20% of the home owners take like 80% of the time. You probably have a
Yeah, I mean,
silent
at the meetings, usually
majority and a
always the
few
same
people who
people
are
show up.
really causing a
Um,
lot of drama.
you know, uh, as I said, 80% doesn't even vote. They don't care at all who is on the board. They never show up to any meetings, which is fine. I mean, at the end, in a perfect world, you have people you can trust, and they do the right decisions for everyone in the building. So you shouldn't put too much of your time into something like this. I mean, before I joined the board, I was like, just, move into my building, was just looking forward for like a happy life and enjoying my time basically. And I put my name on the first year just on the election sheet basically, because I thought it might make sense to figure out where my HOAs, my maintenance money really goes. At the end, I was elected in the first run, and then I stayed for 3 years because it is interesting, like all the dynamics between the board, the employees, the management companies, and the residents, and just try to figure out a way where you can live in peace and everyone can be happy. This was like always, at least what I was thriving through.
Yeah, that's interesting. And then it's, I think, also a lot about community building, right? How did you communicate? Like, how can I imagine that?
So
Was it really on these meetings, or did
there
you
are
have a
official
newsletter or
channels,
something
and then
like that?
there are unofficial channels. I believe in our building we have nowadays 4 different WhatsApp groups, and every group is basically believing what the owner of the group is saying. And so this is definitely a little bit controversial. And then you have the official channels like the newsletters. We have handouts in our hallways or in our, mailing box room, basically, where you can see like, you know, the very important stuff. I guess as a resident, you don't really care if let's say, I don't know, there's a paint job to do, and you don't really care too much of who is getting the job. I mean, you obviously want like a good comparison between the companies, that they all do the same for a more or less same amount of money. You don't want to overspend. If a board always decides to go with the most expensive one, I would questioning why that is. But like in general, as I said, usually you shouldn't be too you shouldn't go too crazy about these little things.
Yeah, that's interesting. And if you had to kind of describe like the perfect
I mean,
board
that's
member,
I
or
guess
what
that's
would
the
that
interesting
person
thing,
be
that
like,
you
basically?
have a lot of different people with different professions on the board. So I guess it always makes sense to have someone who has a slightly idea of engineering, construction kind of things, to get a better understanding if it's really necessary to change this item, or if it really makes sense what a contractor is telling you. It makes sense to have someone who has a really strong sense for legal, because you get a lot of contracts and stuff. So it makes sense to understand what you're reading, because not always ChatGPT really can help you with that. Um, it definitely makes sense to have at least one person who really understands money, because, as I said at the beginning, we're talking about like really big numbers and a lot of items. When you see like a budget from a big house, a big condominium, there's a lot of stuff going on. And if you don't really understand numbers, it's really hard to read through one of those Excel sheets. So I guess these three different perspectives are really important. And then you definitely can add some stuff. I mean, I have no clue about legal. I can read numbers, but I'm not in finance or something. And I'm definitely not in construction. I have a marketing background and an employee. So I'm entrepreneur. So I try to see it as a company, how what you need to do to run a smooth company, so that the residents, or vice versa, like your clients, are happy. What you need to do that your employees really doing the work, but still being motivated to show up the other day. And so this is like my angle all the time, or was my angle.
And that's very interesting. And then you said, so if somebody like as a normal homeowner, maybe not part of the homeowner association, and they get some information, I think what would you advise? What's the most important thing that you felt was
I
always
mean,
worth
it
looking
makes sense
into,
for
or you
every
would
resident
recommend to
to
people?
understand what's going on the budget. It definitely makes sense to understand if there are like any assessments down the road, because obviously a building gets older from year to year. So it is basically something where you always need to do some tweaks here and there, or to do some changes. And it is definitely important to understand what is going on in the place where you live, because if something breaks and if it's expensive, everyone has to chip in, pay for it. And it makes your life easier when you understand what is going on, because at the end you don't want to get a bill over, let's say,
Yeah, and then
$10,000 you
maybe,
have to pay, and don't really understand for what that is.
yeah. And that also, I mean, it sounds like a lot of responsibility for people on the board, basically. So you mentioned
No, I guess
it's
this would
not
be
paid.
the wrong
Should it be paid?
motivation
What do
for
you
a lot
think?
of people to get on the board. I think the most important motivation, and this is at least from almost everyone I was dealing on with within the board, was always to make the community a better place.
Very nice final words. Write into the comments if you want to hear more about the life in Homeowners Association board, basically. And this was
Bye
this
bye.
episode of Zeitgeist Podcast. Please like and subscribe, and see you next time.